Chapter 5. Before I could even think to react, I was bowled over, knocked off my feet, and hurled across the room, only to smash against the wall with a sickening thud. I tried to scream, but the air in my lungs had been forced out, and as I opened my mouth, water rushed in. I started to panic. I kicked my legs and tried to grab something to regain my balance, but I couldn't fight the force of the water. There was a sudden pain in my back, and I was bounced against something sharp, and then another searing shock as something else smashed into the side of my head. I felt like a sock in a washing machine, being bounced and battered, spun around, unable to right myself or gain control. My head was under water. My eyes were wide open, but I couldn't see anything but black. I needed to get to the surface. I needed to get air, but I wasn't even sure which way was up. My mind raced. This was it. Right here. Right now. I was going to die. I was going to drown. I stopped struggling, and almost immediately I popped to the surface. I took a deep breath, filling my burning lungs. Desperately, I looked around. All I could see clearly was the ceiling. It was just a foot or two above my head. The strong current swept me up, and I thumped against the wall above the doorway leading to the kitchen. The water was pouring in through the front window and into the kitchen, and probably out the back window and back into the river. If I couldn't fight against it, I'd be pulled out of the house. I had to get to higher ground, up the stairs. I caught the faint outline of the chain from a light hanging down from the ceiling. If I could reach it, I'd be that much closer to the stairs. I pushed off the wall and surged forward, grabbing the chain. I felt it give slightly, but then it held, anchoring me in place. Now I had to move the rest of the way. I tried to orient myself. The stairs were just over to the left. I could try to fight the current, and if I failed and was swept backwards, I'd still be able to grab the chain. I knew I had to move now while I still felt strong enough. I'd have to make one last push and just hope. And then there was a light, and in that light I saw David. He was climbing up the stairs, a flashlight in his hand illuminating the route to safety. I let go of the chain and swam forward toward him. I dug in with my hands, clawing at the water and kicking with all my might until I thumped into the stairs. I started to pull myself up. A hand reached down and grabbed me and pulled me up. My knees knocked painfully against the steps until I tumbled forward, up the stairs, out of the water. I landed on top of David on this floor, the second floor. Thanks, I gasped. He nodded his head but didn't answer. His mouth was wide open and he was panting. I could see his face. His eyes were open as wide as his mouth. He looked scared. No, he looked terrified. I was trapped. I couldn't get out. I couldn't breathe, he said, his voice barely louder than a whisper. Me neither, I said as I struggled to sit up. It just caught me. I thought I was going to get pushed out into the river. Your arm! David held up his right arm to examine a big gash below the elbow, using the beam of the flashlight. I don't know what happened. Does it hurt? He shook his head. I can't feel anything. It just feels numb. Everything feels numb. He lowered his arm again and looked straight at me. The water, it just exploded. It shot me across the room, into the wall. I hit the wall. Me too. It knocked the wind out of my lungs. But what happened? I shook my head. I don't know. I thought we were safe. Are we safe now? I peered down the stairs. It was like looking into a dark, watery cave. I couldn't see anything except the surface of the water, a couple of steps from the top. Wait, how many steps were above the water when we crawled up? I stared intently at the water. It bubbled and boiled as it bounced against the steps. It was hard to judge just how high it was and if it was rising or... Wait, the second stair from the top was now completely underwater. It was definitely still rising. Get Susie up now, I screamed. David jumped up and ran into Susie's room. Susie, Susie, he yelled. I rushed in after him. She was sitting up in her bed, her eyes wide open, a look of fear and confusion on her face. I reached down and scooped her up, blankets and all. Daisy thumped down onto the floor. Susie started crying. I wanted to calm her, explain what was happening, but I couldn't do either. I didn't understand it myself, and I was fighting to stop myself from bursting into tears. Suddenly, I realized that there was water on the floor. In just a few seconds, the water had climbed up the stairs and was gathering on the floor under our feet. We have to get higher. The only thing higher than this is the roof, David said anxiously. Then we have to get up there. But how? He demanded. I went over to the window as quickly as I could. Between the water on the floor and Susie in my arms, I had to be careful not to fall. The water was boiling by, just below. I couldn't see anything. My flashlight was long gone, along with my shoes. I need light, I shouted over my shoulder to David. David rushed over and pointed his light out the window. There was an overhang from the roof. Even if there were some way of getting up the wall, there'd be no way of getting past that overhang. I don't think we can do it. I don't see any way. But we can't stay here. The water is still rising. He was right. I could feel the water washing over my toes. Maybe we could go through the window and hang on to something that floats, David said. Maybe we could take some wood or look out there, I screamed, nearly panicking now. We wouldn't be able to hold on. We'd be washed away. Susie started wailing even more loudly. Maybe there's another way, David said. What? What other way? He pointed the beam of light up the rafters. Between us and the roof were the finished beams, exposed because Mr. McBride had never finished the ceiling. Up there, he said. We have to get up there. I nodded my head in agreement. I turned Susie so that I could look straight into her face. Her eyes were tightly closed, as if she decided that anything that she couldn't see happening around her wasn't real. Susie, I said, trying to sound as calm as I could, I need you to stop crying. She pressed her face against my shoulder and kept on sobbing. Susie, I need you to listen to me. She started to cry even more loudly. Susie, I have to put you down so that I can. She wrapped her arms and legs around me in a death grip. Susie, please, I need you to. No, don't put me down, she screamed into my ear, and she tightened her grip around my neck, her fingers digging in. Susie, David yelled, smarten up and stop acting like a baby. I'm not a baby. Then stop acting like one now. David grabbed her and her arms dropped away from me. He plopped her on the floor and her feet splashed down into the water. It was rising rapidly. I had to think fast, and for all of us. I had to get them and myself out of this freezing water, somewhere dry, as high up as we could go. I picked Susie up again and put her on the desk in the corner. Stay there, okay, Susie? Turning to David, I said quietly, we're going to climb up there into the rafters and get Susie up there. Go get some dry clothes on fast. I yanked open the top drawer of Susie's dresser and pulled out 3 pairs of socks. I grabbed sweaters out of the middle drawer and took them to Susie. Get dressed up as warm as you can, Susie, like you're going to play in the snow. I'll be right back. I sloshed back out and into the McBride's bedroom. Thank heavens Miss McBride wasn't much bigger than me. I pulled a pair of plaid trousers off a hanger and struggled into them, dropping my soaking skirt into the water. Then I grabbed a cardigan and then some socks from her dresser and ran back into Susie's room. David was already sitting on the desk beside Susie. Instead of his pajamas, he was wearing his jeans with a shirt and sweater and thick wool socks. I handed the desk chair to him. David, climb up onto this chair and get into the beams. I need you to help Susie get up there. He handed me the flashlight, and I shone the beam on the chair. He stood up on the desk and then climbed onto the chair. He reached up, grabbed one of the beams, and in one motion swung himself up. He took a seat on one of the rafters, his legs dangling over. I started to climb onto the desk next to Susie. What about Daisy? Susie sobbed. Daisy. I'd forgotten all about the dog. I swung the light around the room and found Daisy back on Susie's bed, all curled up in a ball. I aimed the flashlight right at her, and her eyes glowed gold. She turned her head away from the light, like it was keeping her awake, and then laid it back down on the bed. That dog was trying to go back to sleep. We couldn't just leave Daisy there on the bed, but there was no way that she could balance in the rafters. Wait, I had an idea. Hold this, I said to Susie, and I handed her the flashlight. I dragged Susie's little bed to the middle of the room. Daisy opened one eye as if she were asking what I was doing. Move, I screamed to the dog as I knocked her off the bed onto the floor. I grabbed the mattress off the bed and struggled to lift it up. It flopped and bent. It was heavier than I'd thought, but I had to lift it. Finally, I dropped one end into the water on the floor, propped the rest on my back, and aimed it to the rafters. Take this, I yelled to David. Put it across the beams and we can use it as a perch to hold the dog. I pushed the one end up, and David steered it onto the rafters. Even with both of us working, it was heavy and awkward to move. He heaved it up and threaded it through one set of rafters and then guided it so it sat on 3 different beams. I don't know if this is going to work, David said. It might not be strong enough to hold any weight. I don't see what else we could use, I tried to think. Wait, yes I do. I ran out of the room. Leaning against the wall in the hallway was a piece of plywood. I grabbed it and dragged it back into the room. Put this over the beams. I lifted it up. It was heavy, but nowhere near as heavy or awkward as the mattress had been. David set it down on the beams. It formed a perfect little perch, a platform, a nest. The water was now 1/2 foot deep. We had to get Susie up into the rafters. She was sitting on the desk, her arms wrapped around her knees, her face buried, rocking. She was still holding the flashlight, but it was pointed aimlessly at the floor. I moved in close, my mouth by her ear, and wrapped my arms around her. It's okay, Susie. We're going to be okay, I said softly. We're going to go up there, I said, pointing to the beams. It's like a little tree house we made just for you and David and Daisy and me. She looked up at the little platform. Maybe I can convince your parents that you and I can even sleep up there tomorrow night. Wouldn't that be fun? She didn't answer, but I detected a little smile. But tomorrow night, it will just be you and me and Daisy, just the girls, no boys allowed, and we'll sit up there, and if David comes into your room, we'll throw things at him. Could we gob on him, she asked. Of course, a great big green gob right on his head. She started to laugh. But first, we have to try it out. You go up first, then I'll help Daisy up, and then I'll come, okay? I climbed up onto the desk. It felt good to have my feet out of the freezing water. My legs felt numb. My whole body felt numb. I'm going to lift you, and then David is going to help pull you up. Ready? She climbed up on the chair, and then I lifted her into the air as high as I could reach. David grabbed both of his sister's hands and pulled. She sailed up and away, and he put her down on the platform. Well, do you like your nest? I called up. She nodded. Daisy. Sure, I'll pass her up. I turned around, and I had expected her to be sitting on the bed again, but she was gone. I played the flashlight all around the room. The water was rising, and there were now toys floating about, but there was no Daisy. Where had that stupid dog gone? I jumped back down into the cold water and sloshed into the hall. Water was rushing, boiling up the stairwell. I waded down the hall, flashing the light into David's room. Daisy, I yelled. I expected her to be on his bed, but there was nothing there but the crumpled up sheets. She's over there, David yelled out. Where? I called back. Here in my mom and dad's room. David was standing on the beams above his parents' bedroom. I rushed in. Daisy was curled up on Mr. and Mrs. McBride's bed. I grabbed her by the collar and dragged her off her feet. She strained against me as I pulled her off the bed, struggling to try and climb back up, but I held tightly onto her collar and towed her along the water. Daisy fought me all the way, angry that she had to wade through the water. She even snarled at me, and I was so surprised I almost let go. She snarled again and started growling. Using my free hand, I splashed water into the dog's face. Daisy, Susie called out. Good girl. Yeah, good dog. Stupid dog. I grabbed her around her tubby middle and plopped her down onto the desk, and then I climbed up beside her, keeping one hand on her collar to stop her from running off again. Actually, there was probably no chance of her jumping down into the water. I'll pass her up. I stood on the desk and again gathered the dog in my arms and heaved her. She was heavy. A few more walks and a few less snacks would have been a good thing. David reached down and grabbed her. Then he pulled her up and placed her on the mattress. Carefully, I climbed onto the chair. I reached up and grabbed one of the rafters. I started to pull myself up, but my arms began to quiver, and I felt my energy start to fade. I didn't have the strength to pull myself up. My arms felt so weak. Here, David called out. He grabbed me by the back of the sweater, tugging it partially over my head as he pulled. I fell onto the platform between him and Susie. Thanks, I gasped. I feel weak, tired. The cold water sucks away all your energy, David said. That's what kills people when they fall into cold water. They get so weak they can't swim anymore and they drown. How cold do you think the water is? Not freezing, but really cold. How's your arm? It doesn't hurt. My whole arm is numb. It doesn't feel like anything. It's like it isn't even my arm. He turned his arm over so we could both see it better. There was a 6-inch long gash on his right forearm. I couldn't tell how deep the cut was, but I could see that it was still dripping blood down his arm, onto his jeans, and onto the platform. I just wish we could clean it up, maybe some tape, some gauze on it. We have all that stuff in our first aid kit, if you can get it. The last thing in the world I wanted to do was go back down there, but if I had to, I had to. Where is it? First, you go to the stairs, he said. Then take a really big breath, jump in, and swim to the kitchen. I think it's in the drawer 2 over from the sink on the right side. You're joking. No, I'm pretty sure that's the right drawer. And since you're in the kitchen anyway, you might as well get me a soda too. I opened my mouth in disbelief. He couldn't really think that I should. Elizabeth, I'm kidding. I don't even want a soda. I do, Susie said. Can I have one too? I'm thirsty. No sodas, Susie. Will you settle for a drink of water? David asked. We have plenty of that. I don't want water. Nobody on Raymore Drive wants water, but a soda is a little bit out of reach right now. This was crazy. Why was he joking around? Didn't he know how serious this was? The worse things got, the more he seemed to be joking around. Then I thought about how that was the way he always acted with me, with kids at school, with his teacher. Always joking, always saying things that got him in trouble. Maybe that wasn't him trying to show what a cool kid he was. Maybe he was acting that way because he was scared. He'd left behind his old neighborhood, his school, and all his friends to come here to a whole new world. I would have been scared if I had been him. I was scared now. David was too. He didn't show it, but he had to be. Maybe he was doing the right thing. His acting like it was a joke helped to keep me calm, to keep Susie calm. I looked down. The floor was about 8 feet down. There was maybe 2 feet of water on the floor. We had 6 feet of safety. Above us, the roof was another 3 or even 4 feet up. Maybe at the very peak. That meant we had 10 or 12 feet of air. Would that be enough? Or would the water rise so high that we'd be pushed right up, trapped, drowned? I couldn't imagine the water rising that much more. But a few hours ago, I couldn't have imagined any of this ever happening. How much had the water already risen now? 15 feet? 20 feet? All I knew was that it had flooded all the way from the river up to the height of the backyard, up over the porch, all the way up to the stairs to the second floor. If it had come that far, maybe it could come farther, rise higher. What would we do? We needed some way out. I'll be back, I said as I started to slide off the mattress. Where are you going? David grabbed me by the arm. I'm going to get a soda. You sure you don't want one? Seriously, where are you going? I'm just going down for a minute. He let go of my arm. I grabbed one of the beams and carefully lowered myself onto the chair on top of the desk. David lit my way with the flashlight. I sloshed down to the floor. The water sent shivers up my legs and into my spine. All around my feet, floating in the water, were Susie's toys and clothes, and some pieces of wood. I was looking for a specific piece. I took one that was heavy, but just a little more than 2 feet long. I held it firmly and waded over to the window. I smashed the wood against the glass, and it shattered. What are you doing? David demanded. The whole bottom pan of glass was smashed out, leaving behind broken and jagged pieces hanging from the frame. Why are you doing that? David yelled again. I thought we could use some fresh air. He wasn't the only one who could joke around. Next, I knocked out the jagged pieces, opening up the entire frame. It was a clean, big hole, big enough that I could fit my whole body through it if I needed to. Now, if the water kept rising, we'd at least have a way out. We wouldn't be trapped up there in the rafters, pushed up, suffocated, drowned. Now, if we had to, we could get through that window. Through the window and into the river. Out of the frying pan and into the fire. That was another thing my Nana always said.